Welcome to the Joy of Connecting, where modern professionals share stories of meaningful connection and how it can increase business success, unlock career growth, and create personal happiness. If you like what you hear today, get even more by following the Joy of Connecting on LinkedIn and subscribing to our newsletter that features tips from experts on how to network and connect with more meaning. Welcome back to the Joy of Connecting show, everyone. I am here with one of my favorite types of people, a founder. He is not only a founder who, as he and I were just saying, do all of the things, but he's a founder of a community that is built around really important connections. So welcome to Scott Tran. He is the founder of Support Driven, a community that serves customer support and customer experience professionals, I believe.
Yep.
He's going to tell us a little bit more. But Scott, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit what you do for a living, but I always like to say what's more important, who are you really passionate about helping?
Yeah. So let me start with the second question first, because that'll connect. It all connects, right? So the people that I serve are the people in the support driven community. I've worked at a lot of companies, done a lot of jobs, but like getting to serve the community has been the most rewarding, just the most meaningful, right? Because having worked at a lot of places, like there's sometimes you're working on things that you're like, I don't know who cares about this, and for us, like all the things that we do have a pretty like strong connection back to like, we help the community this way. We build a community this way. So that's who I serve. Right. And that connects back to what I do, which is, I run Support Driven, and that is, as you mentioned, an online community for people that do customer support as a career. And so for us, the community started first, right? So it was just a community. It was just Slack, very slow, word of mouth, right? And then eventually the community asked if Support Driven could host a conference because, as an industry, customer support, I think it's underserved given the number of people in it and just the budgets involved, right? Like it's just underserved compared to a lot of other techie.
Sales.
Yeah, 100%. Sales, developers, marketing. Right.
Yep.
So I talked to a lot of people in the community. We eventually did do a conference, right? And that was the start of Support Driven, the company, right? Because up until that point, I had like no idea where we were going or what we were doing or what the future was. But once we kind of connected into that, that became my job pretty much since 2016, right? So it's 2016, I've been working on Support Driven full time.
Well, and from that bottom up, coming from the bottom up to start, you have probably learned and seen all about how like real community grows. And I bet you've seen some spots where you're like, wow, that didn't work too. What are some of the things that you've learned about how people connect in your community and how you can help with that, or maybe how you have to leave your hands off in some ways?
So there's one thing I keep in mind as we grow, right? And I was super nervous about this as we're getting close to 1,000 people, right? Because when we're 100, everybody knows everybody. Everybody like is saying hi to everybody almost every morning. But that doesn't really happen. That doesn't really work the same way when you get to 1,000. And so the key thing that I look to in terms of, are we keeping the spirit of the community, right? Comes back to, are people helping each other, right? Because that is if we had to distill what is a community about, it's about people in customer support helping each other, whether that's with your job, with hiring, with getting a job, right? Kind of essentially all the ways. And I know that if that's still happening in the community, right, then we're going to be all right.
How are you spotting it? How are you, I don't want to say measuring it, but I don't think that's necessarily hard measure, but how are you keeping track of that?
So it's definitely not a measure, right? It's not a metric. It's not a quota, right? I think when it happens and when we see it, it's more of a signal, right? So kind of are we seeing signals that it's happening, right? And one of the strongest signals that I look to is, are people recommending the community, right? Are people inviting other people into the community? Is that essentially that word of mouth still happening, right? But that's a big signal for us. And then if people are talking to each other, if people are asking questions, if they are getting responses, if they're getting help, right, then it's happening, right? So these are all like signals.
Yeah. And it's a great signal. As soon as somebody says, hey, other person that I trust, you should also come in. You're right. That is such a sweet signal that says, it's still a value to them, not only a value, but they're going to put their own,
Yeah.
recommendation on the line for someone else. That's really impressive. Tell me, I know you've been growing a lot, right? Like, so you said you started at 100, you're worried at the
hmm
1,000 mark.
hmm
You and I had chatted a little bit about this idea of how do you maintain that smaller group or the
hmm
feel of connection as you grow? Anything else that you've done or are trying that's working well to maintain that connection?
Yeah. So this is something that I think we became more intentional about as we were kind of getting to that, even before the 1,000 mark, but suddenly I feel like it's become more important after that 1,000
Mhm.
member mark is supporting and encouraging people to connect outside of work, right?
Mm, mhm.
Because, for example, we know generally most people come in because they have like a work question or so just something work related. But I think they stay because the community is where they have their friends, right? Where they are connected to other people, where you can make friendships, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's what gets people to come back, right? Because it's not just like a Q&A site where we're like, I just come in when I only have questions, but it's also where I hang out with people because we both love cats, right? Or we both love like cooking. The other thing that's kind of come up, and this wasn't really anything that we did intentionally, but I know that it happens, right? Is that we're also end up being the place where former coworkers stay connected, right?
Ah, interesting. Yes,
Right.
yes.
So like maybe like 5 years ago, you worked with like these 10 people, right? And
Mhm.
now, you're kind of like scattered to the wind, right? We're still kind of like that third space where like everybody's still there. Everybody's still connected.
Yeah, I know there's a couple of, the biggest companies have some of those ex-employee
Yeah.
spaces, but for
Yep.
99% of companies, that's not happening, especially if you're in faster moving growth stage companies.
Right.
Um,
And I think
yeah.
that still happens at the large companies, but I think, especially at certain size, I think that's different because if you think about it, like when you work at a company, there's how many people do you want to stay connected to afterwards,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The other key thing is the community is also a place to stay connected with the people that you meet, right? And kind of in a much, in my opinion, more authentic way than LinkedIn, right? I feel like LinkedIn can be very performative, right? And people are very vulnerable on LinkedIn because there's a lot of encouragement to like just always be your best self on LinkedIn, which
Yeah.
is not true. Like you can't be your best self every day of the week,
Yeah. Oh,
right?
yes. If you want me to soapbox, I will get on that soapbox. I I work very hard to show up as authentically as I can on LinkedIn, just to
hmm
encourage other people to do so as well,
Right.
because it can be such a positioning and holier than thou and,
Sure.
the
Right. And
best
thought leadership and all this other
mm,
like stuff that you're supposed to be doing. Right.
personal branding.
Yes. 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 So yeah. So I think the key for us is the social connections is what lasts, is what's sticky.
It's beautiful. I'm sure you've seen lots of connections either through the community or even for
hmm
yourself. One of the things we ask our guests to do is to tell a
hmm
story of some sort about a connection that you've seen that either helped maybe with business or maybe just with personal happiness. Do you have a story to share with us today?
Yeah. Yeah. So our very first conference was all about connections, right? Because it couldn't have
Oh,
happened without it. So just to give you some context, right? I had up until that point zero experience organizing anything like not even a dinner party. But I knew that we had people in the community who had organized events and conferences. And so I talked to a bunch of them and learned how they did it. And then from them learned how could we do it? Because when we were thinking about doing that first conference, we didn't want to just do just a conference. We wanted to have more of a purpose behind it than just, oh, like here's a conference. And so it was through the community, right, that essentially we learned how to organize a conference. It was also through the community that we got the first venue for the conference.
cool.
We had somebody who essentially could give us the venue, which was huge because for the first one, because we
Mm,
didn't know what
yeah,
we were doing. It was because of the community, right? We did a Kickstarter for it and we hit our goal in the first 24 hours. And that was huge, right? Because you go into it blind, you don't know, is there actually any interest around this? Is there any demand in the community, in those connections, right? In the community is what made the Kickstarter work. Because I think at the time that we launched the Kickstarter, we were only maybe 500 or 600 people as a total size. And so how many of those people can you actually get to show up in person? Right. And it
yeah,
was the Kickstarter and the community really telling people about it that actually made it work. Right. Because
yeah.
we needed to, at that point, tell people who were not a part of the community about the conference so that we could actually do the conference, have enough people come to the conference. Ultimately, it was the community had to do the listing to make it work.
Yeah. Yeah. So the connections drove all the things you needed to
All
pull
of it,
off an
all of
event,
it.
pull off the Kickstarter,
Right.
pull off the marketing.
Yep.
Just incredible. For some, okay, let's step and say somebody else is now seeing their community grow. Maybe they're at the stage where you were early on and they're feeling this groundswell. People are starting to come together. There is the bottoms up community. What's one piece of advice you might give that person for building the right connections or building a scenario in which connections can be made? Sometimes I ask about what's your advice to connect with someone, but for you, I want to ask, well, what's the advice you have for someone who's trying to foster those connections or like make the space for those?
It all comes down to listening. I think that's what shaped our community early on, and it's what continues to shape it today. Because, for example, I didn't sit around thinking, the next step to this is we should organize a conference, right? It literally came from the community. I think that's the magical things about the community, especially if you're the community builder or kind of the host, right? Is that when you bring people together with shared interests, they will talk, right? Because they have so much to say to each other, right? And they're so excited to talk to each other because they're probably not surrounded by people who have that shared interest in their like local neighborhood. And when people talk, they're always telling you, if you're listening, right, the things that they love, the things that they hate, the things that they wish existed. And I think that's what has shaped our kind of direction, right? Is we're always listening. And sometimes people wish something that existed that we think, well, maybe we could do that. And so we do, right? So that's kind of like where we go next.
Dare I say their whole community is probably also really good at listening because it is customer support. Yeah,
Right.
I mean, if you're getting customer
Right.
experience, you're thinking about you're listening. I mean, that's the listening. I think we do a decent job as a marketer. Myself, marketers do a decent job, but customer experience and customer support, you are listeners to begin with. It's funny. For our listeners, and this is the best part about the show, we just push record, and then Scott and I are having a conversation. And isn't it nice that all of you are listening along? But before we chatted, I mentioned
Hmm.
what we were building with my community. Well, we
Yep.
heard people for the last year saying, I'm a member of that
Hmm.
community. Well, joke's on everybody. There is no membership. There's
Right.
absolutely
Right.
no membership. Then we heard that so many times
Hmm.
that that's actually the direction we're heading, which is what does a membership look like? Because people actually think of themselves as members. They're saying it. Let's build
100%.
it. So I
Right.
think
And
I'm like high-fiving
yes,
myself because I'm listening to your advice in advance.
yes, yes. Right. And that's the thing is that people want community. They want membership. They want to be a part of something bigger. They want to be with people that understand them. Right.
Yes.
And I think what you're doing is great because you are listening to them. It's like, okay, well, what does membership mean now? Right.
Yes. Yeah. Then the tricky
Yeah.
part comes. Okay, I've got one last important question for you. When we think about connection, who do you look to for inspiration? It sounds like there's a lot of amazing people in the community, but who is a total pro in your mind?
Someone who I feel I can still learn a lot from when it comes to building community and kind of is in our space. Is Nate Brown. He is the founder of the CX Accelerator community. It's a different community than ours, right? But I find it super interesting, just like what he's doing over there, and what they're doing together. Yeah.
Yeah, and to learn something that works for one may not work for another, but but to have someone like Nate who you're inspired by and always kind of keeping your
Hmm.
eyes on. I have lots of those folks. It's really fun.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
we're gonna be one for me now. I'll be like, what is Scott doing? Because I've already inspired myself with these
Right.
membership ideas.
Yeah.
Oh, this was so
Awesome.
cool. So for everyone listening, this is actually our first time sitting and chatting with each other. And I
Yes.
feel like
Yep.
now there are multiple follow-up conversations that I'm excited to
Yes.
have with you. But thank
Yes.
you for coming today. Before I let you go, where can people find out more about you or about Support Driven? Anything you want to shout out?
Yeah. So support driven at supportdriven.com, right? I'm on LinkedIn. I have been working on getting more active on LinkedIn, but in an authentic way. So I'm not a big thought leadership person, so I'm not doing that. But I do find, and this goes back to I'm a big fan of like meeting people where they are. And I know that for some of our people that are in our community, they're also kind of more active on LinkedIn. And so like, that's where they are. So, yep.
Important. Well, you can just have them, lead from the community. They can be the thought leaders for the whole
Yes.
community right
Yes.
there.
Yes. Yes.
Oh,
Yep.
thanks for coming today. This was so fun to chat.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm glad we got a chance to to meet and looking forward to continuing to stay connected and all the follow-up conversations.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a review to help us reach more listeners. Have a story of your own to share or know someone who should be on the show? Visit www.joyofconnect.ing and let us know. Now go send a short message to someone you've been meaning to connect with. You never know where it might lead.